So I'm now going to introduce John Mason to you. John here is going to speak for a few minutes just about why you should vote yes in this referendum, why you should go for the alternative vote. Just say John Mason trained as an accountant in Glasgow, has worked for housing associations and a nursing home company, spent 3 years in Nepal. On his return from Nepal, he joined the Scottish National Party, was elected councillor for Garra Hill in 1998, and again 1999 and 2003. And in 2007, he was elected as one of the councillors in Baillieston. The Westminster by-election in July 2008 saw John elected to Westminster for the seat of Glasgow East. At Westminster, he was the SNP spokesman on work and pensions. He served on the public bill committees for the welfare reform and equality bills, but he was not re-elected in May 2010. John is the parliamentary candidate for the SNP for Shettleston. John, 5.
Okay, thank you. Well, I really must congratulate both Andy and yourselves for actually being here at a debate about this referendum, because I think this must be just about unique in Glasgow, if not in Scotland, that actually there is a hustings about this. Lots of people are interested in the Scottish Parliament election, but the AV referendum is a bit of a specialist subject, I would have to say, but we've all got to vote, so it's very important. And I think it would be fair to say that just as there's Christians in all the main parties, and I'm involved, as you heard, in the SNP, so I think it would be fair to say there'll be Christians on both sides of this debate, and it's not a moral one from that point of view. The first thing I just want to say is that I think it's quite wrong that they're having this referendum vote on the same day as the Scottish Parliament, because I think that day should be just for that. Secondly, I would say that my preference as a voting system would be what's called STV, and without getting into all the details, that's the system that we now have to elect council candidates. So all of you, if you live in Scotland, you've got several councillors, you live in a multi-member ward, and I think that is actually the best system. However, the reality is we have this referendum coming up, and on the 1st of April we had the launch for the Scottish campaign, and I was there representing the SNP. There was Douglas Alexander for Labour, who actually wants AV on its own merits, but the rest of us, which was Charles Kennedy for the Lib Dems, Patrick Harvey for the Greens, and myself, we would like AV partly because it's a first step, but we'd then like to go on and get an even better system after that. Now, I think one of my main reasons for supporting AV and saying vote yes in this referendum is because the present system, what we call first past the post, is a very, very poor system and just has so much wrong with it. I've been elected 5 times, 4 times under first past the post, 1 under STV. And when I was a councillor in Glasgow, we had the situation where one party, which happened to be the Labour Party, had about 50% of the vote, but they got 95% of the councillors. So it was totally unfair, it was totally out of line with how people were actually voting, what the result we got was. And it really was not very democratic. I think another thing is that when we talk about safe seats, and you've all seen that there's safe seats in Glasgow, it tends to be often what's called a safe Labour seat, but if you go down to Kent or somewhere, it would be a safe, more of a safe Tory seat. But the danger of that is that poor candidates can be put up by the parties, and people take the public for granted. And the expenses scandal, I believe, was partly because people thought they had safe seats. It didn't matter what they did, and whatever happened, they would get elected. Now, there's lots of things I'd like to change at Westminster, having been there for 2 years. Actually, top of my list would be changing the House of Lords, which is not elected at all, and I would certainly want to see it completely elected at some stage. But one of the arguments for AV is that it would mean, as Andy very well explained, that at the end of the day, somebody has got half the electorate supporting them, whereas at the moment, an MP can be elected with maybe only 33% supporting them, and that could mean that 60 or 70% are actually opposed to that MP and didn't want them in the first place. And we saw the example, but for example, you could get somewhere like, say, a Conservative was supported by 40% of the electorate, but 60% would have preferred another party. But normally what happens in elections is that 60% gets spread out over a number of parties, and then despite the fact it might be fairly unpopular, in this case the Conservative might get elected with only 40%. Whereas if people are allowed to transfer their votes by going 1, 2, 3, 4, you would end up with maybe the majority saying, well, we'd rather have Labour or Lib Dem or SNP or one of these other parties rather than Conservative. And I think one of the key strengths, again, for AV is that it helps prevent extremist parties, and especially the BNP, from getting in. Because what they always hope is that they will sneak through, even though the majority, again, do not want them. But I think if we took Glasgow, for example, we could assume that most Labour voters, SNP voters, Lib Dem and Conservative would put the BNP right at the bottom or not vote for them at all. So their chances of getting elected would be reduced. And I have to say, I think that's a very good thing. I suspect my time's just about up. Okay. I mean, various arguments against it, which I'm sure we'll hear, so maybe I'll leave my answers to them till we come back onto the response bit later on. But as I've said, my preference would be a single transferable vote system, which I think is best. But AV is a small step in the right direction, and the danger is if we vote no, that we get no change at all. And I think we've seen at Westminster there's a lot wrong with the system, so I think even a little bit of a change is a step in the right direction. Thanks very much.
Thanks, John. And I want to introduce Peter Duncan. Peter Duncan is a business consultant, ran a long-established small family textile business. Between 2001 and 2005, he was Member of Parliament for Galloway and Upper Nithsdale. Between 2003 and 2005, he was Shadow Secretary of State for Scotland and Chairman of the Scottish Conservative Party between 2004 and 2007. When parliamentary boundaries changed in 2005, he unsuccessfully contested a new seat, but in May 2007 was elected to Dumfries and Galloway Council. Peter is the Conservative parliamentary candidate for Midlothian South, Tweedsdale and Lauderdale. Peter, tell us why people should vote no in the referendum.
Thank you very much, Chairman, and it's lovely to be here this evening on such a wonderful afternoon. I'll give you a different perspective. I have a very simple view on elections, and my view is the winner should be the winner. That's fairly straightforward, and it's my view. As the Chairman said, I've contested elections, so has John. I've contested Westminster elections. I've won one, and I've lost two. And to be honest, I've respected that decision whether I won or whether I lost. If I lost, the other guy got more votes than me, and I lost. He's the winner because he got more votes than me. But I concur with John's view. Thank you very much for the invitation. This is a vital change for our country. And I'm grateful for, as John says, one of very few opportunities in this hustings-type format to address what, in my view, sees as the danger of the UK sleepwalking into what I think would be a disastrous change in the way in which we elect future governments at Westminster. So what difference would AV make if on May the 5th, the British people as a whole voted yes? What would change? Well, the truth is, some things would stay exactly the same. The sun would still get up in the morning, hopefully. Some things would stay exactly the same. There would still be, despite what John said, and we'll disagree very, very amicably this evening, but despite what John said, experts predict there will still be 200 or so safe seats, because there are approximately 200 or so members of Parliament who are already elected with more than 50% of the vote. So for those 200, and that's about a third of the current House of Commons, for a third of all seats, there would be virtually no change whatsoever, and safe seats would still remain safe seats. But what it would do is it would give very much more influence to smaller parties. And I don't criticise John in any way whatsoever as a member of the SNP for seeing that as an opportunity for his party to gain more influence. If you go back to after the election last year, where the Conservative Party emerged as the biggest party, but not big enough to form a government, John and his colleagues were rubbing their hands with glee, because that was an opportunity to exert, weren't you, John? Secretly you were. That was an opportunity to exert influence. As a small group of members of Parliament at Westminster, they could dominate the scene, hold court, see the party leaders, interview them on what they were going to do for Scotland, which was fine, but it is disproportionate to the number of people who voted at that election for the SNP. What it will do is it will make strong government less likely. Make strong government less likely and make weak government more likely. Because what will happen is, because it statistically will increase the success of smaller parties and reduce the success of bigger parties, it will mean there'll be more negotiating behind smoke-filled rooms, if we still have smoke-filled rooms anymore. The deals will be done in the dark. You'll be aware, for example, that Nick Clegg has been criticised hugely for committing not to introduce tuition fees or fees for university education, and he's backtracked on that. That's the perception, after a deal to form the coalition. It will make those kind of compromises more likely. Just to conclude just briefly about what elections will be. They'll be more expensive. It's no coincidence that the most significant funders of the Yes campaign are the companies who will fund the computer equipment to work out how it works. You did a very good job on explaining how this new system would work. I'll explain in a sentence how this system works. The guy who's the winner is the winner. He who gets the most votes is your Member of Parliament. Thank you.